Well, good afternoon, everyone. We'll open hearing number 9, submissions on Selwyn District Council's Variation 1 to the proposed district plan. And at this stage, we're hearing about rezoning submissions relating to Prebbleton. Just before we hear from our submitters, anything from the reporting officers before we commence?
Not today, sir.
Great, thank you. Right, our first submitter is Trices Road Residents Group. Good afternoon and welcome, and to yourself and others who may be in the room and speaking later. If you've circulated material in advance, thank you very much for doing that. We've read everything that's been pre-circulated, so nothing that's pre-circulated needs to be read out loud to us. But anyone who has read material is very welcome to summarise that or highlight key points for us. And then we'll see if we have questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Catherine Ford. I represent the Trices Road Rezoning Group. I have appeared before you in relation to the proposed district plan process. I represent a group of landowners who've been working together to secure residential rezoning in Prebbleton for many years. They have a rural block of land on the southern edge of Prebbleton, which borders a reserve and the existing residential area. The site's in multiple ownership. I know you've read my submissions. I won't go through those, but I just have a couple of brief matters that I do intend to touch on with your leave. Background to the site. The council variations are split into 2 parts. Part A is the introduction of the MDRS to the proposed plan. Part B is the introduction of the MDRS to approved plan changes. Notwithstanding any appeal under the operative plan, this site's captured by both. This site has been subject to a private plan change application, Plan Change 72. This sought to rezone the site Living Residential Z under the operative Selwyn District Plan. In April 22, the council resolved to accept the Independent Commissioner's recommendation to approve Plan Change 72. The outline development plan was approved as well, and that applied Living Z across the whole site. The decision on Plan Change 72 is subject to an Environment Court appeal that's been lodged by a neighbouring landowner, the Drinnans. The appeal does not seek to decline Plan Change 72, and I think that's a critical point. Rather, it's categorised into 2 issues. The Drinnans seek that a portion of their land is incorporated within Plan Change 72, and then also management of stormwater. Following mediation, a preliminary hearing, there's one outstanding matter, and that relates to the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land, and the court's going to hear that next week. It's unclear whether the court will have sufficient time to issue a decision on the appeal prior to the scheduled release of decisions on these hearings. Therefore, it's very unlikely that Plan Change 72 will have operative status by the time you release your decision. But the timing associated with the appeal is quite confused, and that ultimately any zoning that comes through under that appeal process is potentially going to be superseded by these variation processes and have very little utility. In relation to jurisdiction, in addition to the submission that Trices Road Rezoning Group filed on Variation 1 and Variation to Plan Change 72, Trices Road have also progressed their submission on the proposed district plan, as I've already mentioned. The preferred relief that they are pursuing under the proposed district plan process is general res zoning, and a comprehensive suite of evidence was filed in support of general residential zoning at 12 households per hectare, and that's a matter that I touched on in my legal submissions. The alternative relief of large lot is also sought through the proposed district plan, and that's to provide a pathway for a fallback option in the event that the panel under the proposed district plan doesn't adopt general res zoning, and or this panel doesn't adopt medium density residential standards. Our communications with you, the panel, during the proposed district plan is that you'll make a decision based on the evidence in front of you. I suspect that you will be taking that same line with respect to these variation processes, and on that basis it's submitted that the determination of this variation process is limited to intensification rather than the rezoning element. The rationale for 15 households per hectare, I've covered that off in submissions. I won't touch on it in detail, but I do want to make the rather pertinent point that the support in Trices Road submission on these variation 1 and variation to Plan Change 72 is hinged on those versions as they were notified, which included 12 households per hectares identified on the outline development plans for the Plan Change 72 site. The move away from that with the recommendation from the council officer to 15 households per hectare has the effect of not enabling, in my submission, residential development in accordance with the housing enabling legislation. It essentially provides a de facto limitation which will impact the feasibility of development projects and will in turn limit the delivery of new housing stock to the market. All the evidence that's been filed for Trice's Road rezoning group supports an average site density of 12 households per hectare. And it's my submission that that's the appropriate density that ought to be applied to the site. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. Raymond?
No, I thought your submission was very clear. Thank you.
Lindsay?
Yeah, just one. I think in relation to your final comment about 12 hectares, 12 households per hectare, not, 15 households per hectare not being enabled by this. Can you just sort of fill us out? Because it intuitively you would have thought a higher density, the more you can actually achieve on that particular piece of land, particularly in terms of the Enabling Act. So can you flesh that reasoning out?
Sure.
Obviously, I haven't been involved in the Plan Change 72 process and so forth either, but be interested in your views on that.
Of course. I think probably the key point to begin with is that the technical evidence and the supporting work that's been produced for Plan Change 72 was based on 12 households per hectare. There was planning evidence and also servicing work that was done around those figures. That's not to say that there isn't the ability for the site to be developed at a greater scale at 15 households per hectare, but the work that was done, the preliminary technical work, supported 12 households per hectare as being appropriate for that site, but also for Prebbleton. If we move in 12 households per hectare, the only place that it's actually mentioned within the variations is in the outline development plan narrative, which attaches to the ODP. And the effect of changing 12 households per hectare in that narrative to 15, as is being pursued by the City Council and the Council Officer, has the effect of meaning that any subdivision that's commenced on that site that is less than 15 households per hectare will trigger either a discretionary status under variation 1 or a non-complying activity status under Plan Change 72 to the operative plan. So it's imposing a greater level of restriction, and I would also submit feasibility and cost assessments that would need to be taken into account as to whether or not that site can actually deliver 15 households per hectare and it will be suitable for the market in terms of meeting supply and demand. So I think, long story short, the ideal outcome to really enable housing would be to remove any reference to density, but obviously that's a bit of a dead duck in the water. It's 10 households per hectare, I think, under the RPS presently, 12 households per hectare as granted in Plan Change 72, and then this uplift that's being sought. And I understand that the uplift is generally geared towards greenfield sites where they may be able to accommodate a higher level of density than some of the other sites that may retrofit MDRS. This site in particular has a large hedge down one side, down Birches Road, which is required to be retained for landscape and buffering views, etc. So that actually impedes the ability to develop the site at 15 households per hectare because there are constraints. The difficulty with the wording that we have in the variation as proposed by the council officer is that there isn't any explanation for what is a constraint. And that creates some real uncertainty for my clients, that are these conditions that have been imposed by the Independent Hearing Commissioner on Plan Change 72 going to constitute a constraint and allow them to develop the site at a lesser scale. And that's where the key issue arises. In terms of your question around surely 15 households per hectare would enable further development, I don't disagree with you, but if you have a non-compliant activity status, that may mean that the site, the site may not be able to proceed in the same quick succession as we're hopeful that it may be able to, because there'll be a whole lot of other hurdles that need to be jumped through for a subdivision at a non-compliant activity status to be consented. And so it may have the opposite effect, that rather than bringing 15 households per hectare online across that site, it may impede development and it may no longer be appropriate to be developed at that scale.
So apart from the hedge you mentioned, what other site constraints are there? No, I know we haven't got the evidence in front of us here, but it would seem to me it's a flat site. It's got access to a couple of arterial roads,
all the
doesn't have a
servicing.
stream or anything like that running through the middle of it. So just for my own benefit, what other constraints are there to achieving a high density on the site?
It's in multi-ownership, which is another one of the reasons that there are landowner, and look, it's not really a resource management issue in this context, but there are considerations that need to be taken into account in terms of roading, stormwater service areas on the site, ensuring that there's an appropriate yield across the landowners who are part of Plan Change 72. But the hedge is the biggest one, because it means that there needs to be quite a substantive setback for dwellings that are going to locate within those titles that may issue within proximity to the hedge. I say a hedge, but it's actually it's a shelter belt, I think would be a more appropriate term. And so that the shading impacts the wider development of the site.
And the existence of the existing houses on the property, is that also a constraint?
To a certain extent, but the evidence that we've advanced is that if that presents a problem, then those sites will be cleared to allow for new development. There are some landowners who may wish to retain their current homes and curtilage. There's a couple in particular that won't be bowling their beautiful homes, but there are others that would be willing to do so.
I could have found this out, but you can fill me in. Why would it trigger a non-compliant consent if you exceed?
Well, let's say that the development wanted to proceed on a 12 households per hectare basis, because that's all the work program that's been done to date. And there is a 15 household per hectare note in the outline development plan. If the subdivision doesn't proceed in accordance with the outline development plan, under the operative plan, it will fall to a non-compliant activity, and under the proposed variations, it will fall to discretionary.
Okay, thank you.
So I just wanted to confirm, I think you said the Environment Court hearing regarding the Drinnan land, that's still set down for 19 June?
It is.
Yeah, okay. And I was the same as my colleague, interested in what constraints might apply to the site. The wording recommended to us in an earlier hearing for the development plans was 15 households per hectare unless demonstrated consent constraints applied, in which case a minimum net density of no less than 12 would be achieved. So if we were to find in favour of 12, then it's important that we understand what the constraints are. So I've written down, you've mentioned early on, you said the servicing assessment was based on 12. And you said something else which I didn't catch. What else was based on 12 in terms of the technical evidence?
All of the technical evidence is based on 12.
So in terms of things that might bite those servicing, what else?
Well, the traffic assessments.
Yeah, transport.
Yeah. The capacity in the networks was based on 12 households per hectare. the roading layout in terms of the stormwater flow paths
Mhm.
and the ability to take stormwater from roofs. That's probably the key considerations.
Right.
And just on your comment in terms of demonstrated constraints, that's what variation 1 provides for, but variation to plan change 72 doesn't have that same qualifier.
Yes, but as you said, the minute our decision or our recommendation to council is released and adopted, the plan change becomes moot. So that's why we're focusing on those provisions. And that'll be the case for all of the private plan change proponents.
Yes. Has there been any discussion around what constraints might mean in other hearings?
Yeah, various discussion about that. We've asked questions and we've had various answers to it. Yeah. All right, but that's all I wanted to ask you about. Thanks very much.
No problem, my pleasure.
So the next submitter, Margaret Springer, represented by Mr. Thompson. Afternoon.
I just have a response to the section 42A report, which is covered in my evidence, but I'll probably just highlight a couple of things.
Yep.
It might be up to you, sir, whether you want to hear from Mr. Hall first, because one of the outstanding issues, as far as I understand it, is the servicing issue.
Mhm.
And it probably might help myself and the panel if Mr. Hall went first.
Yep, that's fine.
Yep. So he should be online there now.
So, Mr. Hall, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you, but that doesn't matter too much. Mr.
How's that?
Thompson, there we go. Mr. Thompson has volunteered that we should hear from you first. So thank you very much for pre-circulating your evidence, which we've read. You don't need to read that out loud, but you'd be very welcome to summarise it for us if you wish, or else highlight key points, and then we'll see if we have questions for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner. I've compiled this evidence in a review of the site and the Section 42 report from Mr. Blake Manson. I've also had discussions with Mr. Blake Manson and his direct superior, Mr. Murray England, and come to an agreement as to the servicing of the proposed site for both water supply and sewer. The water supply, we have reviewed the existing capacity of the wells in the area and decided for such a small site that there is sufficient capacity, not just in those wells, but in the immediate pipe work outside the site. That meets the criteria, we believe, from the RPS of having that particular infrastructure there available. The other and more interesting issue is to do with wastewater. There is a sewer directly outside the site, so that criteria is met. It is more of a point is made about what is the existing capacity within the sewage system in Prebbleton. We've reviewed the general flows of sewage in Prebbleton, and we've provided that in my evidence, and you can see from that there is a diurnal flow where we have high areas of flow and low areas of flow during the day. Now that is very typical in wastewater systems throughout New Zealand or throughout the world. But what it does provides these areas of capacity when the flows are low. If we can utilise a system of discharge of wastewater off the proposal to meet those areas of low flow, then capacity can be found. We've investigated a potential system with a supplier of small pump arrangements that would be applied to each house. Each house would have their own pump. Within that pump, there would be a timing device that would only release the flows at those times where there was very low flow elsewhere in the system. Those pumps and timers would be completely maintained by the owners, the future owners, and would not be of any burden to the taxpayer or the ratepayer. And it is a very simple system. We've investigated what size the system may be able to get to in conjunction with the provider, and you can see in my Appendix A the outcome of that investigation. And it is very limited as to the number of sites which can be serviced in this way with this particular system. And I would suggest that those number of sites which are provided in that consultation with EcoFlow would then therefore limit the number of connections that we would put into this submission. As it turns out, the number of sewer connections that EcoFlow suggests that we can use fit very nicely with the intended density for this very small site. So we feel that the criteria from the RPS are met not just in terms of the capacity, but also in terms of the availability of the service directly at the site's boundary. We have discussed this post section 42 with the council, and they are in agreement with our findings, and therefore we see that infrastructure is not an impediment to the rezoning of this land.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I'll see if we have questions for you, Ram.
So Mr. Hall, is what you're talking about a low pressure sewer system?
It's not actually it's a local pressure sewer. Low pressure was not quite the terminology, but I think you understand these systems. You've seen them before. They are used throughout Canterbury post-earthquake. They are very resilient. We've used them in the thousands in various developments, particularly in town, in the city. The city have quite a different sort of situation where they take control of the maintenance of those pumps, whereas in Selwyn, where they are utilised, the private owner maintains the maintenance. But that's not a big concern. EcoFlow, who are the provider of the system, they are well set up in Christchurch. They've got their own technicians, they've got spare pumps, they've got a warehouse full of them. And basically what happens if there is ever a failure, there's a little pump unit, alarm goes off, they call EcoFlow, EcoFlow come out with a new pump, they open up the lid, they pull the pump out, unplug it, stick the plug back into the new pump and drop it in. Now that takes some time, but there is capacity in the tanks associated with these pumps for at least 2, if not 3 days of storage. So there are, it's not infallible, but the system is set up such that if there is a delay, it can still cope with it. And it is very simple replacing a pump.
So if you needed more capacity than at least 2 days, what would happen?
We could put a larger tank in.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you.
And Mr. Hall, one issue, if we're minded to favour the rezoning request, was whether or not an outline development plan and a narrative would be required. So a question in my mind in that regard, in terms of the local pressure sewer pump system that you've just helpfully explained to us, would the requirement for that and how it would be operated be sorted out as and when permission was sought to join into the Selwyn District Council's sewer network?
Well, in terms of an outline development plan, I see no problems in dictating the connection points now. They are very simple. There is a sewer manhole directly across the road from the site, and that would definitely be the location for the sewer to be connected. There is a 150 millimeter water main just near the corner of the site, and that would be the connection point for the water. I don't see any problem with that being added to the to any potential ODP.
Yeah, I guess I probably asked you the wrong question. I have in my mind that we might not need an ODP because this is such a small site.
Yes.
So I was just wondering if we did not have an ODP, would the wastewater system that you described to us, would that be required and sorted out at the time that permission was sought to connect into the council sewer?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. And other than that, no further questions, but thanks for your helpful evidence explaining that wastewater system.
Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that appears to deal with one of the two issues that were raised in the Section 42A report. The second issue concerns the highly productive land. So I think I'll start by saying that the planners generally agree that this site fits well within the NPS UD in terms of creating promoting a well-functioning urban environment. It is within 400 metres of the centre, and meets those requirements. So to me, I think what I've been looking for is a pathway through the NPS on highly productive land, the issue that's been raised by Ms. Carruthers. And in my evidence, I sort of covered three possible pathways. One is through the site being a rural lifestyle block as it is, within what is being argued through various legal submissions and by myself and previous evidence, which is a rural lifestyle zone being the overlay. I don't propose to go into that. You've had enough evidence on that, enough legal submissions, but that's one possible pathway for this. The second, but probably the more likely one, is 3.6. Now, 3.6 has three components, as you know. And the first one is that it's required to meet or provide sufficient development capacity to meet demand for housing to give effect to the NPS on urban development 2020. So I realise you're going to hear a lot of evidence tomorrow on this as well from Mr. Colgrave and perhaps from the council. I've read Mr. Colgrave's evidence on Plan Change 79 and for the hearing tomorrow. I've also read Mr. Yeoman's evidence that he was response to Mr. Colgrave. I've got my own view on that, but it may not be relevant to this hearing. But I've come to the view that there probably is a need for some more capacity in order to meet the requirements of the NPS UD, bearing in mind that the requirement of the NPS UD is at least sufficient capacity. So that's what 361 is asking you to do, is to give effect to the NPS UD. The NPS UD requires at least sufficient capacity to be provided at all times in the relevant markets. The other thing about sufficiency is that it's not just a numbers game. It needs to be looked at from a competitive aspect and the housing topology aspect and the locational aspect. Now, this particular site differs from other sites that you'll be considering in that it's the only site to the north of Prebbleton and it's the only small site. So the other sites that are offering up rezoning, including Plan Change 72, they're all quite large sites and they're all to the south of Prebbleton. So there's a point of difference here. And I think that's relevant when we look at the sufficiency argument. So I think overall that 3.1A is met. Secondly, the alternative is, I've heard it argued that for such a small number of sections, they can be provided through intensification. I've dealt with that in my evidence. I think theoretically it can, but I've driven around Prebbleton and I can't see any sites within 200 or 400 metres of the town centre that would enable 17 or 20 houses to be built comprehensively. You may get organic infill occurring, but I don't think that's the same thing. And then there's the subsection C, which is whether the economic, social and other benefits outweigh the costs of losing the soil. And I think Mr. Ford's evidence is pretty conclusive on that. So, I mean, overall, we've got a piece of land here which arguably should have been rezoned in the first place, particularly in previous documents, but I realise that's probably not a matter for you to consider. But it's well placed, and we've to provide for convenient housing, and it can be serviced, and it cannot be used realistically for agricultural production on 1.28 hectares. So I've gone to the third point. I think or third pathway is I've referenced clause 2.2, I think it is in the MPS. I'll just check that reference. The MPS HPL, which is to do with integrated development. And I think there's what I'm suggesting in there is that I'll just find that clause in my evidence, if you'd like, sir, if that helps.
Yeah, I think it's 3.2 in the MPS.
3.2 in the MPS, I think, yes,
Yep.
correct. And so at the risk of stepping into legal submissions here, I think that it provides perhaps a potential pathway for the panel or decision makers to exercise some discretion around the kind of achieving the best of both outcomes for both MPSs. So I've kind of put that in there as well. But apart from that, that's all I really want to say.
All right, thank you for that. Questions, Raymond?
No, I thank you.
Lindsay?
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Just looking at the geographical context of the site itself, just on Google Maps at the moment. So there's a Canterbury Equine Clinic to the northeast, and then residential properties on the other boundaries, apart from a wedge. So if we were to accept the proposition that this land does get rezoned to MRZ, what would happen to the wedge? Do you know anything about the wedge at all?
Across the road?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was trying to find out whether that was in private ownership. I'm not sure. Oh.
Okay, so yeah, no, it was just filling in the gaps of my own, out of my own curiosity, what that land was for. Is it grazed? Is it?
It's sitting there as a park at the park at the moment.
It's currently mowing, and I think there's a sign discouraging people from undertaking recreational activities on it from the number of times I've driven past it. Would that be right?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and this piece of land we're talking about is not within the notified urban growth overlay, is it?
No, it's not. It is.
And you explained some of the history and behind the various strategic planning processes to get to where we are at the moment.
Yes.
Okay. Look, I don't have any other questions. Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Ms. Thompson, you're right. We've received legal advice from council solicitor on the MPS HPL and the arguments relating to land that's either zoned rural inner plains or DRU ZSCARD1, and we've given a lot of thought to that. So I just wanted to ask you some questions about your first option. So the land in question that's currently not occupied by housing or housing curtilage, is it used for primarily non-productive purposes?
Yes.
What would they include?
It's used basically. It's used for a veggie garden, some veggie gardens.
Yeah.
I think Mr. Brinkley used to graze goats on it, but it's got a sort of a storage shed there of some firewood in it, and various other sort of machinery, for maintaining the property.
Yeah.
I'm happy for Ms. Springer to elaborate on if that would help you, but that's my, we'll walk around the site. It's got some vegetation on it.
Yeah.
It's got a specimen tree at the front. Yeah, so it's really not used for any productive purposes.
Yeah. And is the are the grassed areas, are they mowed or grazed?
I did have milking goats for 20 years, but now I've just
Mows the lawns. Yeah. Okay. All right, well, that's good. That's all I wanted to inquire about. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I'll just stay here because I think the next one is.
You are, yes. So B.03 Residents Group, again, Ms. Thompson, not the first time we've had a look at this one, is it?
No, it's not, Chair. Look, I think I could probably go straight to questions, apart from a question you may have around the ODP, bearing in mind, or the ODP narrative. Last week, where there was a discussion about what the purpose of ODPs are, whether it's for the benefit of the private developer, or should it sort of bind the council to do anything. And there is a part of the ODP there which refers to the front of the frontage there, which was required.
It's the road frontage upgrade, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And so I got in there that a sentence saying the timing and funding of these upgrades will be determined through the LTP and development contribution policy. I think that would be helpful because it provides certainty both for the landowners and for the council. And it gives it's pretty clear that I don't think at this stage the zoning should be dependent on that frontage upgrade. It's totally impractical.
Yeah.
And I think eventually the council will get round to putting this into the LTP, apportioning costs appropriately at the time. The only other part of the narrative which you might be interested in is the density, where I've been thinking about this, where it's got a long-term minimum of 6 households per hectare. I think that might be a little bit binding, given the circumstances here. I think that might be the wording could be shall seek to achieve or something like that, because it's a piece of infill, and it's really hard to either know the timing or the form or design of any subdivisions in the future, even though I've inserted a concept plan, which would give confidence to the panel that this can work. That wording, panel may feel could be toned down a wee bit, just shall try to achieve such. I think in the long term, 6 houses per hectare is probably achievable, particularly one vacant site could provide quite a number of dwellings.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, but apart from that, I'm happy to go to questions.
Okay, everyone.
Yes, on your ODP, it says green links, but I can't see where they are.
Right, the green links, there are 2 that should be on there.
Anything green?
Oh, well, they might be a different colour. Actually, I think they might be blue.
Is it below blue? Is it underneath the blue line?
Yes,
Right.
I'm sorry, they are more bluish than green. So they're the ones that go out to Springs Road and through to the connection cycle.
No, thank you.
Nancy?
Just on your 6 household per hectare and the fact you want a rezoning to medium density residential, it's a long way short of the expectations for MRZ. Do you feel that it is appropriate to even put in the 6 households per hectare? Isn't that sort of defeating the purpose of MRZ, recognising there's existing constraints with the existing houses on it?
Yeah, yes, it could be, but I went by the current format of the current template, if you like, the ODPs, and they all have a density statement there. I think you're right, Commissioner, that for a piece of infill development, and the MRZ being what it is, it may not be appropriate. I'm more than happy to remove that if the council staff and if the panel are happy to do that. Bearing in mind that the MRZ is enabling, of course, so it could permit 15 households per hectare on one side, on that sort of thing. So I think the MRZ is appropriate within the framework in which the plan is working. But having a density may not make a lot of sense.
So in terms of actually implementing the outline development plan, there are numerous constraints on the site which make achieving higher densities over and above 6 per households per hectare unachievable. It's a long-term document, isn't it? So I'm just thinking through my own mind about what is the 6 households per hectare is so far removed from the other expectations in terms of MRZ.
Yes, I'd agree, but again, I was trying to follow the kind of the approach that the council has taken with its ODP, and I'm not even sure whether an ODP is required myself. However, it was suggested in the Section 42A report, and it was on the basis that, from my understanding from Ms. Carruthers, that it's needed in order to trigger the LTP process to provide for the frontage. That was my understanding.
For the Trices Road frontage pedestrian works.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thompson, just before I ask you a question, so to the officers, is that correct? If in the absence of an ODP, would the road frontage upgrade works not be triggered in the long-term plan? And why would that be the case? You can put in the long-term plan whatever you like.
Not quite correct. Mr. Thompson's not quite correct. It was more about if the triggering the upgrade was to form part of, for example, Subrec 13, this stuff needs to happen as part of development of this area in terms of triggering activity status.
Right.
Then there would need to be a way to trigger that activity status. And then, if I just may, the density thing was, in my head, I was thinking that more around providing a way for this and more infill type development to avoid being caught by the strategic directions objectives about 12 or 15 households per hectare.
Yeah. And I'll come to you in a minute. And so put your microphone back on. So in terms of the ODP specifying 6 households per hectare, was your statement there in support of that or against that?
I would support a number if that number is intended to be less than 12 or 15 or whichever the panel decides is the appropriate for generic areas.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you for that. So Ms. Thompson, just in terms of that, then if the ODP was to have wording such as seek to achieve a long-term minimum of at least 6 households per hectare.
Well, I mean, got to bear in mind, this is not a greenfield development. So my reading of everything to do with development plans and ODPs in the plan apply to greenfield developments. I mean, there are no other infill areas or MRZ areas within the existing projected infrastructure boundary that have a density requirement. The only ones, as far as I know, are in the RPS, where you have a 30 households per hectare around certain, it's in Christchurch City, it's not Selwyn. So to me, I mean, having a density at all is, I mean, for an infill development, that seems odd.
What's the current density across the site?
Oh, it's 2 every hectare. They're 5,000 square metre lots.
So it's currently 2 households per hectare.
Yeah, thereabouts.
And so just because what I'm trying to decide in my mind is whether or not we need an ODP. So back to you, Ms. Carruthers, in terms of this road frontage upgrade, can that occur in the absence of an ODP?
Can I get back to you in the morning on that one?
Yeah.
I just want to check a couple of things.
Yeah, sure. All right, and so Ms. Thompson, in terms of a general strategic objective being 15 households per hectare unless they're demonstrated constraints, unless it would be 12. If we were to opt for something lower than that, would the constraint in this case be the fact it is infill?
Infill in existing dwellings and also
Existing dwellings, yeah.
existing dwellings. And I think, you know, the variance of potential across each individual site, depending on where that house is, you just cannot kind of plan for it. It happens organically.
I guess it wouldn't only be the location of the house within a lot, it would be the desire of each lot's landowner as well.
Yes.
Okay. All right, that's all I wanted to ask you about. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Just say thank you to the staff. And thank you for the panel, of course, but thank you to the staff for all the work they've done. I think this is my last time we'll be here.
Yes.
So, and I really appreciated the work that the cooperation with the staff and knowing how hard it is for them. It's been a great effort. Well done, guys.
Yep. All right, thanks, Ms. Thompson. We've enjoyed your submissions to us over the last couple of years, probably, isn't it? So wish you all the well for the future.
Thank you, sir.
So now we adjourn until 2:35. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We'll resume hearing number 9 of submissions on variation 1. And at this stage, we're considering rezoning requests for Prebbleton, and our next submitter, Helen and Tom Fraser. Yep, so when it's read, it's good. So Mr. Fraser, good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you.
We've received a number of documents from you. I have in my little file here a summary of submission and attachment A, which relates to Lincoln Voice, your expert evidence summary, your expert evidence, and a document called submission. So you don't need to read out loud any of that to us because we read all of that. That was very interesting and helpful. But in terms of that overall package of information, you're very welcome to summarize your key points for us, and then we'll see if we have questions for you.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm obviously Tom Fraser.
Yep.
And submitting on behalf of my wife myself. So I'm submitting in 2 parts. One is an expert witness, and then as a submitter. And some of what I'm going to be talking about today is really rebuttal of the evidence that Birches Village Limited will be presenting tomorrow, because it's really, as you know, we've been through a Plan Change 79 hearing about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and a lot of the evidence was fairly similar, but they've also submitted some new evidence. So all the soils within the site are Class 1 and Class 2 soils, and there's general agreement across everyone that PC 79 site qualifies as highly productive land through meeting the criteria of clause 3.5 of the NPS HPL. However, in the Birches Village submissions, there are some points around the soils that I'd like to rebut. Mr. Mathamo states in his evidence in paragraph 17 that there are some air soils within the site, and that is not correct. All soils are Wakanui or Templeton soils within the PC 79 site. He then goes on to state in table 2, paragraph 21 and 22, that W indicates wetness resulting from poor drainage or a high water table as the dominant limitation on the site's productivity capacity. And I'm referring now to the Lincoln Voice expert evidence tabled at the P79 hearing and also in the submission that I put in. The Lincoln Voice, the author of that was Dr. Sam Carrick, who's with Landcare Crown Research Institute at Lincoln and is a soil scientist, and also Associate Professor Tim Curran and Professor Keith Cameron, both from Lincoln University. So in paragraph 29, they state the lack of experience in soil and Lucy's survey may explain the mistakes in the interpretation of the soil attributes that are contained in the Versatile Soils report. On the website of the Landcare Our Environment, this area is described as Lucy subclass 2S, not 2W as stated in the applicant's report. And that's quite important, that the 2S compared to 2W. The area Lucy 1 land is correctly denoted as subclass 1W, and the Lucy subscript W denotes a degree of wetness relative to the soil type. So there are 3 W's in there, and the soil type in the site PC79 is the least of those wetness degrees. Based on the incorrect interpretation of the Lucy subclass in the applicant's versatile soil assessment report, it is incorrectly claimed that both the class 2 and class 1 land is identified as having a soil wetness resulting from poor drainage or a high water table as the dominant limitation of the site's productivity capacity. And I'll talk a bit more about the capacity shortly. The subclass mapped on PC79 does not mention a wetness limitation, as the predominant 2S land and only a very slight wetness limitation below 100 centimetres on the minor area of Class 1 W land. The applicant then goes on in paragraph 33, Lincoln voiced incorrect interpretation in paragraph 33. Soil wetness limitation is further claimed in points 36 and 37. And then in points 38, 39 and 40, evidence is then provided to show a range of crops adversely affected by poor drainage. This is an incorrect inference, as the soils on the site do not have a significant wetness limitation. So the applicant went on to state that you couldn't grow certain crops because of the wetness of the soil, and that was incorrect because the long history of the site indicates and has had all sorts of crops growing on that have not been limited by any wetness limitation. More importantly, in paragraph 35, the soil map that underpins the S-map online is that produced during a detailed assessment by the New Zealand Soils Bureau of the soils and agriculture of Part Paparoa County. So that was the predecessor to Selwyn District Council. This was one of the more detailed soil survey reports in New Zealand, being conducted to coincide with the establishment of the Watties factory on Shands Road. It contains considerably more specific detail than is possible to convey in the S-maps, which people refer to. The unique aspect of the assessment was to produce a detailed soil map classified by horticulture suitability for each soil on an 8-class rating. The Templeton soils, which are the Class 2 soils on the P79 site, were mapped as 1A, the highest horticulture suitability. The Wakanui soils were mapped as 1B, the next highest category. In comparison, the Lucy Class 3 land on the western boundary of Prebbleton, which I'll refer to later, is mapped as air soils and classed as 2A soils of moderate suitability for horticulture. I'm bringing those points up because there's quite a lot talked about in the applicant's submissions of the productivity of the land and the potential limitations for productivity. So Templeton soils have a higher relative productivity and crop versatility than any other soils in Selwyn County. The soils on PC79 site are not susceptible to erosion or flooding that make them even more valuable when considering future food production in New Zealand. And a good example of what can happen to some Class 1 and Class 2 soils was recently in Hawke's Bay. We had very good soils, but with Gabriel, they got flooded and caused all sorts of problems, whereas the soils on the P79 site are not prone to any erosion or flooding. So it makes them very, very valuable soils. There is also a lot of discussion about irrigation and the lack of irrigation potential, or the lack of irrigation at the moment on the site. And while I agree with Mr. Mathamo and Mr. Everest that without irrigation, maximum production cannot be achieved. However, this is the case with all soils and all locations throughout New Zealand. Even the west coast of the South Island will not achieve full production, potential production, without irrigation. The more important question is how much irrigation is required. Deep soils like Wakanui and Templeton have a much greater water holding capacity than the Class 3 air soils, so require less water to maximise production. From Lincoln Voice, paragraph 34 of the submission, whilst the Paparoa County report notes that the productivity capacity of the soils across the county is limited by the lack of adequate rainfall and stored soil moisture, it clearly states that that this varies significantly by soil type. Water balance calculations indicate that soil moisture deficit over the summer ranged from 30 millimetres on Templeton deep soils, increasing to over 140 millimetres on shallow air soils. And I believe with new technologies in irrigation efficiency and water harvesting, I believe that probably within the next 15 or 20 years, irrigation water will be available on the site. And we only have to look to see what's happened recently in the county. The Central Plains water, there's an increase of 60,000 hectares in the last 15 years with new irrigation scheme. The other thing is that plant breeders are researching plants that require less water to produce the same amount of product and also have deeper root systems so that they're more efficient and can harvest water from greater depth. So in the future, we're going to have plants that are both more productive using less water and are deeper rooted, not only harvesting more water, available water, but are also more persistent. There's also mention made in the Birches Village statements about nutrients, and Mr. Everest states in paragraph 26 of his submission, Canterbury Land and Water Regional Plan requires that farms greater than 10 hectares must reduce their nitrogen loss to water. So farms that are 10 hectares or less currently do not have to do nutrient budgets. Now, while I don't necessarily agree with that, that is the state of play at the moment. So any property that's under 10 hectares doesn't have to do a nutrient budget. And all the holdings within PC 79 are under 10 hectares. If we look at the capacity, supplying capacity within the Prebbleton region, and I support the assessments provided by the S42O report that there is sufficient development capacity available. And I also support the interpretation in order to fail the subclause 36.1A test the intent of the NPS HPL that the council only need to demonstrate that sufficient housing development capacity already exists for the short and medium term. So if it is decided that more supply is required, then we need to look at what alternative options are available. And Mr. Mathimo states in paragraph 79, beyond the site of Prebbleton Fringe, the nearest less than Lucy Class 3 land is west of the Rolleston Township. However, he does not mention that there is Class 3 land west of Shands Road. This is Class 3 land west of Shands Road, but there's no Class 3 land on the P79 site. I have a map here that I'm not sure whether you may have already picked up that site west of Springs Road, but this is a map that Birches Village produced at the P79 hearing, so I don't know whether you want to have a look at that or not. But and then Mr. Cosgrove for Birches Village Limited also states wrongly in paragraph 102, 103, 104 that there is little or no land around Prebbleton that has lower productivity than the P79 site. This is incorrect because the land west of Shands Road is Class 3 land. So I want to talk just a wee bit about that land that's west of Shands Road that I believe if there was capacity still required for residential land in the Prebbleton surrounds, that this would be an ideal block. There's a block of land towards the motorway bounded by Hamptons and Blake's Road. It's a large parcel of land, around about 220 hectares, and if developed, would last Prebbleton for at least the next 50 years. There are some major advantages when looking at this land compared to the proposed P79 site. The soils west of Shands Road are classified as, well, they're still classified as versatile, are predominantly class 3, and I estimate around about 60% of those at 220 hectares is class 3, with the remaining being class 2. However, these soils are very strippy. What we call strippy, there's strips of good soil adjacent to strips of stony soil. And it makes it extremely difficult for intensive agriculture because crops will ripen at different times depending on their soil depth. And they're also difficult to irrigate because land within 2 or 3 meters will require different amounts of water. The site is fragmented, just like the P79 site, around about the same, around about 4 hectares per land holding. And there appears to be no irrigation being carried out on that site currently. This site is also closer to the Prebbleton school than the P79 site. And interesting, most of the P79 site, the school zoning is actually Ladbrokes rather than Prebbleton. One of the biggest advantages would be that the traffic from this site would have easy access to the motorway, as roundabouts on Shands Lakes, Shands Hamptons and Shands Trench Road are in place or will be within the next 3 or 4 years. So traffic would not have to go through the already congested Prebbleton network. There's also a cycleway planned for between Prebbleton and Templeton in the 2023-24 year. It's also closer to the Pines wastewater treatment plant, which we'll have some discussion tomorrow, I guess. If we're looking forward, if the Selwyn District Council was to identify this area for future development, planning could commence prior to private plan changes being applied for, and this would result in a modern, well-functioning community instead of the ad hoc development that's currently being applied for across the county. And this would result resulting in lots of houses, but limited infrastructure, such as schools, commercial centres, wastewater disposal, and effective transport systems. And if we look seriously into the crystal ball, if we were to plan for development on this site, then you could plan for on the better class 2 soils, community gardens, etc., to develop a more sustainable residential community. There is a negative with this site, and that is that the transmission power lines do go through there from north to south, but there are rules around that, and in this instance, a corridor of 12 metres either side of the transmission lines would be required, but this could be, that only makes up around about 1% of the total site, and the total area could be, that area for the transmission lines could be used for reserves, as is the case in many other subdivisions with transmission lines at present. So I believe there are other areas around Prebbleton that are more suitable to develop than for residential than the P79 site. And also note that the NPS HPL is clear that its overriding objective is HPL land to be protected for use in land-based primary production, both now and for future generations. Class 1 and 2 soils must not be converted to housing just because irrigation is currently not available, as new technologies will remedy this in the future. One of the other things that comes up in the expert evidence of BVL is reverse sensitivity. I believe that the applicant's expert witnesses seem to have this completely around the wrong way. Currently, there are no problems with reverse sensitivity on the site, as it is rural and completely surrounded by rural, except for a very small northern boundary, that is the substation land. Reverse sensitivity would be significantly increased if this land was developed for residential. Mr. Everest states in paragraph 40, the site is bounded with residential subdivision to the north and services adjacent to the residential subdivision to the northeast, which is PC 72, and shares a boundary with rural lifestyle with residential houses in sections to the west. The properties are zoned inner rural, not rural lifestyle. The owner of the closest property on PC 72, so that's diagonally across Birches Road, has stated that they are not going to subdivide, and it is zoned LLRZ, and that comes up in paragraph 121C of Ms. Lawrenston's evidence. To the west of the site is a rural property that's been farmed for intensive arable production for at least the past 50 years. And I understand from the farmer there, his father farmed probably for the last up to 100 years. And a lot of crops there have been grown for the processed crops for watties. And that actually has no houses on that area. There is only one other property to the west that has a boundary with the site. Mr. Mathamo states that the loss of land would be insignificant. The area of farmland lost to housing in New Zealand over the past 20 years is very significant. Gerald Rice, Principal Science Advisor for MPI, published a paper in the New Zealand Grasslands Conference 2021 and stated that there were between 1990 and 2018, there were 27,000 hectares of New Zealand agricultural land lost to residential development. That's around about 1,000 hectares per year. In Selwyn District, over the consent hearings, as at the end of August 2022, and there have been 2 or 3 more since then, a total of over 1,000 hectares has been applied for to go into residential from rural. That's over 500 hectares annually. So I think Selwyn District has had its fair share of zoning rural land into residential. The applicant makes a lot of mention of the current productivity on the site. Mr. Mathamo, Ms. Everest, Mr. Geddes, Ms. Colin Kramer, I think that's pronounced that, make reference to low current production. And I refer to the evidence of Ms. Colin Kramer. In the introduction, she states, in preparing the report, WSP, that's the company, has relied upon data, surveys, analysis, designs, plans, and other information provided on behalf of the client. She has taken no, has not taken any notice of any of the evidence produced by the submitters or from the S42A report. So I believe it's not a balanced report. On page 10 describes the current land use activities within the PC application site provided by an email. It concerns me because the source and content of this email have not been provided or cited. And a lot of the information on that email or that she's stating from that email is wrong. And I'm just using 3 examples. 212A Birches Road stated a few sheep are grazed by a neighbour to prevent fire risk for approximately 3 months a year. This property has been taken for hay, around about 100 medium squares, it's equivalent to 1,500 bales annually for at least the last 4 years. Then the property has finished around 100 lambs from February through to October of each year. The owner of the property, Mr. Geddes, states in paragraph 8 of his evidence that he was not able to get contractors to make hay as they considered the paddocks are too small. This property, as well as 3 other properties within the site, have made hay with contractors each year for at least the last 4 years. Some paddocks that have been made for hay within those properties are less than 1/4 of a hectare. So all contractor machinery can easily negotiate conventional 4-metre gateways. So the statement that you can't get contracts because of the size of the paddocks is completely wrong. 212 Birches Road, 26 sheep are grazed on the land, and the land is harvested for hay each year. The owner of 212 Birches Road has made over 350 medium squares, over 5,000 conventional bales this year, and finishes between 300 and 400 lambs during autumn and winter. Some of this production is from small blocks that he leases from nearby properties. So small holdings are leased to other landholders for production. 144 Birches Road, currently no activity on the land. 26 sheep are very busy, are grazed intermittently for approximately 2 months of the year by the landowner of 198 Birches Road. That is myself. The owner of 144 Birches Road has been extremely unwell for the last 12 months and unable to perform normal farm operations. In the past, this property has fattened cattle for the local market. So a lot of the statements from that email are incorrect, and I feel that they need to be pointed out. Just because some of the land is not currently being farmed to potential is not the fault of the soils. It's the fault of the farmer. There are at least 4 properties within 2 kilometres of the P79 site that have changed land use to horticulture in the past 4 years. So there is that change happening to more intensive use of the land. Mr. Sam Bridgeton Smith gave evidence at the PC79 hearing that he was earning a living off less than a hectare of Class 2 soils, growing salad greens and other high-value vegetables. Highly productive land will always be highly productive land unless it's covered in concrete. So that is the end of my expert submission. Any questions on that?
Let's see if we have questions for you, Raymond.
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Fraser.
Good afternoon.
Has the PC79 submitters liaised with you about the rezoning?
At the PCs, yes.
Okay. Where is your property located?
198 Birches Road. So if you go down Birches Road, do you see, if you've got a map there with the
Yes.
park, the new park is?
Yes.
If you carry on down there, we're directly across the road from that. So we are southwest
Okay.
of the corner.
Are you lot DP 21453? Oh, you don't know. Anyway, I think I know where you are.
We bound onto Birches Road, and it's
in your evidence, you talk about, and you've just touched on it now, about high value crops being grown on 4 hectares or less.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a bit more on that, please?
What sort of crops?
Yes.
Watties will harvest crops of processed peas, beans, etc. from 4 hectare blocks. But on our own land, we have grown potatoes, we've grown lucerne, we've grown specialist seed crops for overseas multiplication. So the highly productive land is a property just east on Ledley's Road that is just 4 hectares gone to market gardening, leased for market gardening. The property south of, which I'll mention later, south of PC79 is just in the last 4 years gone to intensive horticulture production. So this is land that is the best land in Canterbury, and it's close to a process the Watties process factory.
We often hear, we've heard through many hearings now how less than 4 hectares is not productive. And it's just refreshing to hear the other side.
Well, the good example was the one I used at the owner that's made all that hay of some of the land on PC 79 site, but also land that he's leased, adjacent land of 4 hectares, some of it's less than 4 hectares. And it can be like not to full production, but there is the potential there. There are 2 that I haven't mentioned, 2 properties just north of the Prebbleton boundary that are probably less than 1 hectare that are certainly fully economic growing flowers, dahlias and peonies. So, you know, you can make a small, if you've got the good soils, you can make that land very productive.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser. Just some geographical clarifications in the main, but firstly, you mentioned the Paparoa County report.
Yes.
Okay, so Paparoa County existed before 1989, so the report predated that.
Yes.
Has there been any updates in terms of the level of detail that you're aware of?
No, there's certainly been no more soil information that is more detailed than that. That would be one of the most detailed soil reports that's been done in Canterbury, because it was done prior to setting up the Watties factory. So it was a very detailed map. So, and you'll find that in our soil maps right throughout New Zealand, it's like all research. A lot of the good basic research was done 40, 50 years ago because we had plenty of money to do it. There's not the money available now to do that research. So we rely very much on a lot of the soil mapping that was done in the 1970s, 1980s to do our soil maps now, because we just don't have the people out on the ground to.
So the soil scientists are saying that is the best available information in terms of classification and productivity of individual types of soils.
Yes, so they used a lot of that information that was gathered in that report to put into the S maps that we currently are using. Yes.
Okay. Geographical clarification. Now, you mentioned that there's LUC3 land west of Shands, and is that I've got a map in front of me, and I'm just trying to precisely work out where that is, because we've also had rezoning submissions in part of that area west of Shands Road as well.
Can I show you on this map?
Yep, that will be helpful.
So PC 79 is here.
Yep.
And so Shands Road is here. Sorry, Shands Road.
If we get it north-south.
Yep. So that's north
Straight up, isn't it? Yeah. It is. Okay.
So south, it's north up there enough.
Yep.
So here's Shands Road down here.
Yes.
That's Hampton. Shands Road down there. I'm talking about this land up here.
Okay. Thank you.
So this is centre of Prebbleton here.
Yeah. Thank you. And again, a question of clarification in terms of what you just told us before. You mentioned Ms. Lonston's evidence in relation to the northeast of the PC 79 land. Is that the Plain Change 72 land?
That's Plain Change 72.
Okay.
So it's, yes.
Okay. Thank you. I see you helpfully explained where you are in relation to the PC 79 land, as we know. So you're completely surrounded by the PC, your
I'm
land is included within
Included in
the
PC 79.
B79.
Yes.
Okay, and we'll hear from Birches Village tomorrow, obviously. But in relation, and there's quite a lot of comments in there about reverse sensitivity impacts to the new park, the Kakahut Park,
Yes.
and you live very close to it.
Just diagonally across.
What observations have you got about the activities on the site of the park itself and how subject to what they call reverse sensitivity they may be?
Right. So,
Presumably it's a multi-use sport and recreational
yes,
facility.
so
isn't it?
it's still in the process of being developed.
Yes.
Stage one is basically finished at the open on Sunday.
Mhm.
Yes. So they've got sports fields up and running. They've got floodlights in there. They've made a magnificent job with the floodlights. There's no light spill at all. There's lots of other street lighting there that they seem to leave on 24 hours a day. It's a rate power. I'm scared about paying their power bill. They've got some major problems with drainage.
Yeah.
So to the extent that they've now had to cancel all practices and games on there, even though they've only been going 6 weeks.
So if there was conventional farming practices occurring on the PC79 land or agricultural practices on there,
So
what they're saying is that it may, the
Yeah.
proximity to
so the
park.
properties directly across Birches Road from the new domain,
Yes.
they are the small holdings within PC79,
Yeah.
and there's a big hedge right along Birches Road that
Yes.
protects them from any noise or light coming from the new domain. From the car park to the domain is right against the Birches Road. So what you look to drive down Birches Road, you're looking at the car park and the changing sheds rather than the sports fields. So they're protected at this stage. If PC79 was to go ahead, those hedges and the old houses would be demolished, and all the new housing down Birches Road would then be exposed to the noise, particularly the noise from the new domain.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser. That's been most helpful.
No further questions from me, Mr. Fraser, but I found your evidence on the soil issues very interesting. So thank you.
So I want to carry on just with the ordinary submission from my wife himself.
Yep, go ahead.
And some of that is around economics, which I found interesting, Mr. Cosgrove. He states in paragraph 21, page 21, paragraph 107, in addition, I note that PC79 land is probably too expensive to be viable for rural production over the long term. According to CoreLogic's property guru tool, the median value of Selwyn district land is $3.50 a square metre for horticulture. The subject site land is more than 20 times higher at $73 per square metre. That is correct. However, the valuation he has taken is from an inflated value that's been put on the land within PC79 by quotable value, when the Selwyn district was revalued in September 2021, just 3 months after the application went in to rezone. QV valued the land as if it had already been approved for rezoning residential. So who needs a hearing before a commissioner when quotable value can decide without hearing any evidence that the land is going to be rezoned? We believe that the rationale for the QV value is incorrect and have appealed to the valuation tribunal. And that hearing is still to be heard. As a result of our land being valued, being included in PC79 without our consent, and QV valuing our land as if it has been already approved for rezoning to residential, our rates have increased by over 200%, not the 6 to 7 times quoted by Mr. Geddes in paragraph 50 51 of his evidence. He also stated that he was shocked at the revaluation. He was the person responsible for all the landowners within the site having to pay higher rates. More importantly, is looking at the land value on adjoining holdings gives a more accurate value of the inner plains land in this location. So a 5 hectare block directly to the west, at outside PC 79, valued at $16 a square metre. The 51 hectare block directly to the south, valued at $7 a square metre. So the inflated value that Mr. Cosgrove is using is wrong. In paragraph 109, Mr. Cosgrove states, to minimise production costs and ensure long-term viability, nearly all rural production occurs in relatively remote and cheap areas. There are many instances where very high value crops are grown within close proximities to cities. If we look at the location and the connectivity of the site, and you could refer to those maps there, you can see it pretty easily. The proposed site has almost no connection with the Prebbleton village. It would create, if it was approved, it would create a satellite dormitory township with virtually no physical connection to Prebbleton. The land to the north of Hamptons Road is zone LLRZ and has section size of around about 0.5 hectares. The immediate property to the north side of Hamptons Road is a 3 hectare property owned by Orion. And my understanding is that they intend to maintain the site for future development. The closest residential housing on Hamptons Road, zoned LLRZ, is at least 200 metres from the nearest point of PC 79, and the nearest GRZ zone housing is over 500 metres away. All the remaining boundaries to PC 79 are the new domain or zoned inner rural, ranging in size from 4 hectares to over 50 hectares. The total boundary length of PC 79 covers around about 2,300 metres and made up of the following: 120 metres or 5% across Hamptons Road, and that's the 3 hectare Orion property. 500 metres or 20% at Birches Road, and that's across the road from the domain. The remaining 75% is zoned inner plains. The applicant states many times in their submission how the PC 79 will tie in with the Kakaha Park. To take this argument to its conclusion, then it should limit the extent of the development south down Birches Road to Ledley's Road, and then directly west for around about 200 metres to include the 3 properties along Birches Road. The current application extends down Birches Road past the park for another 300 metres and then some 1,000 metres to the west to include the applicant's property. The southern boundary, southern boundary of Prebbleton. In the report and recommendation of the Hearing Commissioner Paul Thomas, PC 72, on the 30th of March 2022, in point 193, he states, the edge outcome is now able to be better provided by the development of the new 22 hectare park, which establishes a large and permanent edge to the southern side of Prebbleton. A couple of other points in the traffic assessment. Traffic in the Prebbleton area has significantly increased in the past 10 years. Many of the intersections on the arterial roads have now reached a danger stage. In the traffic assessments for plan changes around Prebbleton, there is a lot of mention made of different intersections, but almost no mention is ever made of the Springs Birches Road intersection. This is the most congested intersection in Prebbleton, and I plead with the council they need to make urgent improvements with this intersection. While the proposed rezoning application would not be the direct cause of the congestion here, it will only add to the problem. Most of the traffic counts that the traffic experts have used for P79 are out of date, some as much as 4 or 5 years old, and some were taken during COVID work from home. Traffic counts I attained from Selwyn District Council for Birches Road between Trices and Hamptons on the 25th of July 2022 was 7,900. This is an increase of over 5,500 or 80% increase on the count on the 5th of the 11th, 2020. And that was the date used in Appendix 6 of PC 79 traffic assessments. I just find it very difficult to understand in these traffic assessments how they can use such outdated numbers and come up with their recommendations. In my opinion, the data that's being used in the traffic model is outdated and flawed. If the rezoning was to be approved, the section of Birches Road from Ledley's Road to Hamptons Road, so that's the section across the road from the domain, would become an accident waiting to happen. So what we'd have there would be the through traffic on Birches Road, which is increasing and is quite substantial already. They're proposing a roundabout on the corner of Birches and Ledley's Road with a safe pedestrian and bike crossing. I'm not sure how you have a safe pedestrian and bike crossing at a roundabout, but that's right. Traffic turning in and out of the new park, both left and right. Traffic in and out of the proposed commercial area, both ways. Another pedestrian crossing between the park entrance and the commercial area. Bus stop on both sides of the road, and all happening within 200 to 300 metres of Birches Road. It would be an absolute nightmare. Current infrastructure in Prebbleton, particularly wastewater, transport and schooling, are already under extreme pressure without any of the new residential developments that have been approved. Therefore, there needs to be a period, in my opinion, there needs to be a period of consolidation and allow for infrastructure to be put in place before thinking about further subdivision. Just want to comment on Nicole Lawrenson's evidence in urban design. Immediately to the north of the site is a large residential development. That is the Orion land. PC 72 north of Kakaha Park is a residential development proposing a standard urban density of 15 per hectare with a small pocket of LLRZ to integrate an existing large rural residential dwelling. So that is the property diagonally across the road from PC 79. So PC 79, if it was developed, would actually have no direct boundary with standard density housing. It would stand on its own. Then she states in point B of paragraph 121, most neighbours to the west are rural lifestyle blocks with rural residential characters. They are zoned inner rural, not rural lifestyle. And point E states the rural neighbours to the south is a typical farm environment with shelter belts and fencing interspread amongst pastoral land with occasional functional farming related structures. This is a 50-hectare market garden. There are no shelter belts or fences. In paragraph 157 of the evidence, she states that utility reserve sits north of the site across Hamptons Road, blocking connectivity. That's the utility site. It's not going to move. It's going to stay there. It's going to carry on blocking. And then in paragraph 175, Prebbleton has already outgrown the current commercial services available to the population, and the additional of a further commercial facility is necessary in light of the already approved and anticipated future growth. This is her statement. I've visited the town centre. I've recently visited the town centre and noted how every available area corner has been maximised for commercial development and associated parking. It is very compact and well used, but there is no physical capacity to grow. I'm not sure which Prebbleton Nicole visited, but her description of the commercial facility is completely wrong. In the past 2 years, there's been a large commercial area built. The second stage completed late last year on the east side of that development has 13 commercial sites completed late last year. Currently, there are only 3 of those commercial sites occupied. So the demand is not there. There is also significant undeveloped land both to the north and to the south of the existing commercial centre, enough area to double the commercial sites. And just a point of clarification, in paragraph 184, she states that Mr. Nicholson has referenced an existing water race in his evidence. And she says this is not entirely correct, as there is no water race, just a remnant. I'm sorry, but there is a water race, and it's been there for at least the last 50 years, and it's still there. And it flows through into the park, the new park, and they're utilising that in their vegetation. Finally, passive surveillance. There's quite a lot made of passive surveillance, how the residential zoning with houses would help the security of the park. When Selwyn District Council applied for consent for the park, they stated that security cameras would be the security. They would not even agree to install locked gates in the car park. In fact, they haven't even installed gates. So Selwyn District Council do not see that houses across the road from the park are necessary for security. And the fact that Ledley's Road, which forms more than half of the road frontage of the park, does not have any houses on. While we applaud Ngāi Holdings wish to obtain more land to subdivide to make money for their whānau, we understand that this site has no greater significance to Maori than other possible sites adjoining the Prebbleton village. If the site west of Shands Road was to be zoned for residential, then Ngāi key principles, values and cultural understandings could be implemented. We ask that this rezoning application be declined.
Thank you. I'll see if we have questions. Raymond. Ms. Fraser, you were reading from a large document there. Was that one of the pre-circulated documents, or is that something additional that you've written?
Something additional. I can forward you.
Yeah, if you could forward a copy to our hearings administrator, that would be great. We've taken a few notes of our own, but I thought it was a new document, so I stopped taking notes and thought I'd ask you to send it in.
That's not a problem.
But no questions of clarification. That was very thorough. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Right, next submitter is Gary and Linda Burgess. Just see if you need a little break. Yeah. Do you need a small break, Ryan, or are you happy to proceed? Okay. Yeah, good, just checking. So good afternoon and welcome. Just at the risk of repeating something you might have heard me say at previous hearings or having watched this on YouTube, thank you very much for all your pre-circulated material, which we've read, including the evidence statements, legal submissions, etc. You don't need to read out loud any of that to us, but you're very welcome to summarise key points for us, and we'll see if we have questions for you.
E nā kai komihana tēnā koutou. Ko perfect tōku ingoa. Ke kone aho mo, Gary and Linda Burgess. May it please the commissioners, my name is Perfect, and I appear for Gary and Linda Burgess. The Burgesses have filed evidence from Nicholas Harwood regarding lack of natural hazards on their land at 93 Toswell Road, from Jade McFarlane regarding urban design, from Andrew Leckie regarding transport, from Mark Thompson regarding infrastructure, and from Claire McKeever regarding planning, and also rely upon the evidence of Fraser Colgrave, which has been filed for Birches Village Limited. Together, this evidence presents a cohesive, comprehensive reasoning for why the land at 93 Toswell Road, being approximately 16 hectares, should be rezoned from rural with an urban growth overlay to residential. Mr. and Mrs. Burgess haven't prepared evidence, but they are here and are willing to take questions. They have owned the land since 1987. They can give you the history of the land, particularly through the time of the earthquakes, when part of what had been their land was rezoned for residential for earthquake recovery purposes, and the resulting reverse sensitivity issues that that's given rise to on the current very hard interface between residential and rural uses. In summary, the case for the rezoning is that with the hierarchy of planning instruments, the Resource Management Act itself, the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, and beneath that, the Regional Policy Statement, to the extent that it still gives effect to the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, and the objectives and policies in the operative and the proposed plans, that rezoning the land to residential much better gives effect to that hierarchy of applicable instruments. Also in that mix is the National Policy Statement on Highly Productive Land, but although the Burgesses' land is highly productive land in the sense that it is LUC Class 1, because it's within the urban growth overlay in the operative and the proposed district plan, and has been part of a rural residential strategy since 2014, that then takes it out of the application of National Policy Statement on Highly Productive Land. That's my legal submissions in summary. Do you have any questions that you wish to direct to me currently?
Just see if we do. Anything, Ram?
Yes, I do. At your paragraph 27E, you talk about taking into account treaty principles with the rezoning. How have the treaty principles been taken into account by this rezoning?
Yes, Ms. McKeever can explain that in more depth. She does cover it in her evidence, and the principal way is that there's been provision, or there's the ability for any wastewater from the land to not be discharged onto land, that it can go into reticulated wastewater. That is the main way. Thank you.
No questions from us arising from the legal submissions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions for Mr. and Mrs. Burgess?
I will see, Raymond, any questions for the landowners?
Just a bit of background. Just a little background in terms of the curious shape, if you like, the little arrow that projects in the northeastern corner. So I presume that was land which was residual from the development of land to the north. Is that how it worked? I see the drain. Just get the outline development plan up in front of
The
me.
arrow shaped piece
Yes,
is part of the 16 hectares, but because the
the stream
Prebble
runs through the
drain,
middle of it.
yeah, the Prebble drain and the stormwater had to go into the ponds,
Yes,
it got
separate.
for want of a better word. So yeah, that little wee arrow piece is part of the 16 hectares, and that's just how it had to be because the drain had to keep going. you know.
Because originally when, like we say, pre-earthquake years ago, when the Judge Smith or whoever he was decided that they would put a line through our place, they just drew the line at 12 hectares, and of course it crossed that Prebble drain and also ran into 2 wee 4 hectare lots up the top, which cut a wee piece off those as well. So that then just become a piece of a hectare, is it?
It's 9,000 squares.
9,000 squares or something that was sort of stacked. So now it's there, which crosses over that drain. So yeah, that's how that come about, because the development that was done on that 12 hectares that the developers, Prevails, who did that, the guys who did that, the water then comes across there and through to the Prebble drain, through to the ponds, and then out into, what is that other creek called? I don't know, which takes it out to
McGill's.
McGill.
Yeah, McGill's,
Yes.
they join. And then it goes.
So yeah,
So
it was
that's
just,
part of
it
the
was just,
original-
whoever drew the line had never been out and looked at the plot, and it just went through.
Okay,
the
well,
centre.
I suspect that something like that may have happened.
Yes.
And the crossing bit from the bulk of the land to the arrowhead, as I called it before, is that formed? Is it?
No.
Not at this
So
stage,
it's,
no.
but it does show a connection in between the two quite separate blocks of land.
Yes, it was going to be a 12-metre wide bridge going
A
over there.
bridge.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just on that subject, Commissioner, it may be helpful, and if you wish, we've taken a drive around on the land today, and the Burgesses would be happy for you to come on site and do that. If there are no other questions, then I will call Mr. Harwood to give evidence.
Afternoon, Mr. Harwood.
Good afternoon.
So you're welcome to summarise key points from your evidence which you read, or we can go straight to questions, up to you.
I'm happy for you to go to questions.
Okay, Raymond. And Lindsay. That's all right.
Right, Jed.
Yeah.
I don't have any questions, thank you.
Thank you.
And no, nor do I. Reasonably straightforward, I think.
Yes, it
Thank you.
is straightforward. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner. Thank you. Great. Thanks very much.
The next witness for the Burgesses will be Jade McFarlane.
Afternoon, you're welcome to summarise key points, or we can go to questions. Over to you.
Good afternoon. I might just summarise a few
Yeah, of
notes.
course.
I'll keep it quite brief. I'm aware you've already read this, so
There's plenty of time, so don't feel rushed.
um,
If you do refer to your evidence, it'd be helpful just to say which paragraph you're looking at, so we can follow it on our copies.
will do.
Yep.
So my name's Jade McFarlane. Just as an overview, just thought I'd start off at section 11 of my summary of evidence. So just the purpose of my evidence is to illustrate the site as appropriate land use that intends to meet the directives of the MPSUD, which main objective is to create a well-functioning urban environment, and it highlights the most immediate and logical area of growth for the township of Prebbleton. Just moving ahead, just a couple of points on context I'd like to just reiterate. First one's in section 15, just talks about the site being located within 800 metres or a 10-minute walkable distance to the centre of Prebbleton, as illustrated in figure 1, which I'm hoping you have in front of you. Just highlights that, you know, this is one of the closest areas of land that is next to the town centre and the amenities that are in there. Just jumping forward to section 16, the site has been identified by council, as mentioned previously, since the council adopted the rural residential strategy in 2014. As a result of the strategy, the site is in the urban growth overlay in the proposed district plan. So that just highlights its appropriateness for growth and is the logical stepping stone for development and higher intensification. Just jumping ahead again to section 42A reports. Just with reference to Mr. Nicholson's evidence, I note as an overview, my assessment seems to be very well aligned with the conclusions he came to. I just do want to point out a couple of things. The first aspect is with regards to the context again, this alongside the smaller V10087 site is the closest submitted to the town centre and aligns with that strategic objective of promoting consolidation with the core amenities. Just in section 22 there, again, it's close to the supermarket, local shops, that position the site as the most logical next step. And 23 talks about the site's anticipated use, and that's with regards to it being within the urban growth overlay. This is an important factor for the submission as it demonstrates council's acknowledgement in 2014, 9 years ago, that the site was appropriate for a level of residential intensification and associated servicing, which is covered by my colleagues and the expert evidence. If we could just jump ahead to section 24. One of the key aspects for considering intensification is the proximity to existing and potential future public transport routes. The site can be well serviced in this regard to these routes on Tossell Road, which is a collector if required, with the entire development of the site within a 400 metre or 5-minute walking distance to this key route. If we could just skip ahead to the next one, sorry, 25. Just thought I'd point out that with reference to Appendix B of my evidence, Mr. Nicholson's suggestion has been inserted into that with regards to streets that fronting reserves and passive surveillance. I agree with his recommendation for that, so we've included that in our proposal. The next point there on 26 deals with, I do have a few more queries. In general, very supportive of providing connectivity to future urban growth. However, the ODP did show some connections to the south, and it was more of a query around that land, and as it wasn't in a growth overlay, about the provision of those connections across that creek, effectively, ephemeral creek, I should add. Just skipping ahead to 28, I'll read out some of these, bit of a summary, 4 main points there. So that with regards to urban form and design and landscape matters, the site is within the proposed urban growth overlay. It's a site specifically identified for approximately a decade by Selwyn District Council as a site most appropriate for future growth in a form of residential intensification. It will allow for, under MDRZ, a consolidated urban form that integrates seamlessly with the residential growth to the north and contributes well to housing enablement in Prebbleton. It also aligns with the directive of the NPSUD, and I refer to Appendix B, where we've adopted council's 15 dwellings per hectare minimum for those areas. It's well connected for vehicular and active modes of travel, being uniquely within 800 metre 10-minute walking distance to the Prebbleton town centre and 400 metres to Tossell Road, which is a critical urban design matter when considering appropriateness for intensification. And also it will allow for a well-defined organic residential to rural interface with enhanced landscape values along this boundary, southern boundary, with local access reserves providing an enhanced recreational function. I note on that point that the southern boundary there, that's basically the clients have come to us and they want to enhance that amenity and that connectivity in the region, and that's one of the reasons why that's included in the ODP. Just the next point there, for the above reasons I've outlined in my original assessment, I conclude that not only is MDRZ appropriate for the site due to integration and close connectivity with Prebbleton's urban core, it has also been strategically planned for in previous council documents stretching back to at least 2014 with the rural residential strategy. Alternative use, including rural or even rural residential, would seem an inefficient use of this land, given its proximity and integration, and would not align with the strategic planning instruments outlined above or the MPSUD. Skipping ahead, I guess, I'm happy to take any questions, and thank you for the opportunity to present the summary.
Thank you for that. Rowan.
I have no questions about your urban design, but I want to go to the appendix that was attached to your ordinance, the I think it's WSP. No, Elliot Sinclair, sorry, the urban design report at 3.6. Cultural and aesthetic. While there is no significant iwi presence or history within Prebbleton, do you think that's quite right, that there's no iwi history in Prebbleton?
So that's with regard to research into whether there was any mapping showing outlining any of these key areas. With regards to what I guess the outcomes we're trying to achieve, part of that is to enhance that the natural values in the landscape, and so that's, I guess, while the mapping hasn't shown things like that on it, we are trying to enhance the waterways, give effect to Te Mana o Te Wai through that landscape restoration, and through provision of setbacks and reserves against what's effectively an ephemeral drain, which often aren't enhanced in some of these developments. So we're really, with the clients trying to promote that aesthetic, promote that interaction with the water, and the planting associated with that to really, I guess, enhance and lift up that mana of that waterway.
I do appreciate all the planning and the effort and everything to give effect to the values. I'm just stuck on the no history in Prebbleton, that bit.
Yeah, sorry, there's potentially the wrong choice of words for that. Yeah.
But we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McFarlane. I'd just quite like to get to the bottom of the differences between you and Mr. Nicholson. The 42A report itself, let's find it. And it's summarised at top of page 23 of Ms. Carruthers' report. So Mr. Nicholson is of the opinion that amendments to the ODP are required to rationalise street layout, provide for future connections to the east, and ensure that sector best practices incorporated to promote public access and provide passive surveillance. Now, the attachment to your evidence is dated 2021 and we're in 2023 now, and the attachment to your evidence has an outline development plan which shows various things. So presumably there has been a movement in terms of that ODP since that time to take into account some of the factors which Mr. Nicholson raises. So I'm just a little bit unsure about, because I think your evidence came in after, whether or not these particular matters have been addressed and how they've been addressed in the outline development plan. So if you could walk me through that, it would be helpful.
Yep. So in general, is an outline development plan, in the original report at least.
Yeah.
We're dealing with, at the time, a more general residential zone. So this is MDRZ. The structure of it is very similar because it's an outline development plan. A lot of the detailed design, for example, for any future subdivision consent that's at the level where a lot of these, the design would actually be known. I guess what Mr. Nicholson's saying there, and there's a reason why we've proposed to include in the yellow text I've inserted as in Appendix B, is that, that I concur with that finding that, having roading next to reserves is generally best practice. And it does give good piece of surveillance over the reserves, which I do note a lot of the roading in our ODP did have originally. And it's just, having that text in there to cover that, I agree with.
Okay, so the ODP in your Appendix B, have you had the opportunity to discuss that, Mr. Nicholson, at all?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
However, I don't, there's nothing in his markup other than some of the questions I had around connectivity to the south and east that that really differs from what he's saying. So generally, agreement with what he's got. Yeah.
So from if your client's submission was agreed and there was an ODP which was going to be presented in some form in the plan, is this it's still not an agreed position between you and the council?
I would say, if I'm just pull up his outline development plan here, that it's still an applicable design. The only comment I had was on connectivity to the south. However, it's not. It's generally best practice to be to provide those connections. It was more just understanding the reasons why we provide them, because it didn't seem to elaborate on that.
So
obviously, we're dealing within our site, so if there is the move in future to rezone properties in that area, it would make sense to provide the connection. So
we have what's in front of us at the moment in terms of your client's property, and obviously Mr. Nicholson has some general support, but with some matters of detail.
So just in short, we've adopted just in my Appendix B there, his wording on the roading, the reserves, the passive surveillance side of things, whichever is more practical. And we haven't put anything in there about the connectivity because it's something that in general I would agree with. If there was a future growth aspiration to the south to provide that connection, that would make sense.
Well, that's not before us at the moment, whereas yours is. And okay, going away from the detail of the bigger picture, the reason why this land was in the urban growth overlay was basically it was identified for rural residential development. So in terms of fully MDRS residential, is there much in terms of urban design expectations, particularly where that site is in relation to Prebbleton Town Centre, between large lot residential or rural residential and what's on the table now?
So I guess just going back a step, so that rural residential strategy did outline that back in 2014. My understanding is, through the MPSUD, that has changed, and obviously growth changes because it was identified as a next step for appropriate growth. It now falls into that category, in my opinion, of being the next best step for Prebbleton growth, mainly around its proximity to the town centre and the amenities.
Or you could have elected to make a submission that it be a large lot residential zone as opposed to a medium density residential zone.
So I guess my take on that is, because of the location, it was more appropriate and more an efficient use of an urban core to have that rezoned as MDRZ
Okay, thank you.
for at least 15 lots per hectare, which would be a typical density for that type of site.
Thank you.
So just looking at the differences between you and Mr. Nicholson, so Appendix 6 of the 42A report, Mr. Nicholson has an amended ODP at his page 23 of 25, which has connectivity to the south and also across the bridge to the little arrowhead in the top northern corner. And your ODP, which is the same ODP that's attached to Ms. McLeaver's evidence, right at the tail end of her evidence, you've omitted, or the arrows to the south have been omitted, and I understand that's because that's not zoned for development or within the UGO at the moment, but I don't understand why the Mr. Nicholson's desire for a road across the bridge to the little arrowhead has been omitted. How are you going to get there otherwise?
So, well, the purpose of the ODP, we haven't shown an arrowhead in there. We're effectively thinking that's
It's not the ODP I'm looking at. The one I'm looking at is in your evidence. And Ms. McLeaver's evidence. So your evidence, page 48 of 50, Ms. McLeaver's evidence, page 40 of 47, of the diagrams I think.
Sorry, can you say that page number again, sorry?
So your evidence,
Yeah.
page 48 of 50, your evidence 50 pages long.
This is my
ODP will be shown, so I think G road.
Hmm.
And then this one's going to be narrow, it's going to be 20 lots or something, so that's sort of.
Yeah, we typically wouldn't show it right away, which is effectively what that connection would be. It's not wide enough to provide a legal road under the Selwyn District Council's code of practice.
The 12-metre wide bridge is pretty wide, isn't it?
It's not wide enough to meet the code of practice requirements.
12 metre.
Sorry, I don't want you interrupting this witness's evidence to us. I don't know who you are, but your turn will come if you're giving evidence later on. What's the mischief in having an indicative road across that little land bridge to the arrowhead?
I just think it's such a low hierarchy, and again, Andrew can talk, Mr. Lecky can talk to this, but another aspect of it, it seemed to imply that there was going to potentially be connectivity to the northeast by showing that connection.
Connectivity outside of the ODP area or to the little arrowhead?
Outside the ODP area.
The arrow in Mr. Nicholson's evidence doesn't extend beyond that arrowhead.
Yeah, that's what I mean, but I think for me, reading that, it gave the indication that it could potentially connect through into an area which is effectively a buffer between Christchurch City Council and Selwyn District Council land.
So are you saying there's no wish to develop that arrowhead into residential housing?
Oh, no, it definitely would be. It's just we typically wouldn't show a right of way level hierarchy road as a line on an ODP plan.
So can you give me any kind of material downside to including that in the ODP if that's Mr. Nicholson thought that would be a useful addition?
No, that's fine. It was more the connectivity to outside land that that was the query.
No, I understand that one. That was to the south, wasn't it?
And this one, yeah, because in the past, my understanding of the land to the northeast is that it is a buffer zone between the councils.
Yes, but Mr. Nicholson's indicative road doesn't go outside of the ODP area.
Yeah.
And the little arrow in his ODP doesn't extend anywhere near the boundary of the ODP area. It's just allowing access to that little arrowhead across the stormwater reserve or the green reserve.
Happy for a connection to be shown there. Yeah.
Okay, I'll write that down. He eventually became happy with including it.
It's just what we don't want is, I guess, it to be thought of as a road because it's been designed not at legal width for a road to be designed there. But Mr. Lecky can talk to that. Yeah. That's the reason, I guess.
Yeah, but an ODP is an indicative, isn't it? I mean, if illegal roads were cried across there, then that's what will have to be done.
I take that point. However, things in ODPs showing as indicative have been known to have a lot more weight than
Yeah, I would hope they would do.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of it, isn't it?
yeah.
Interestingly enough, in Tifariki, in Lincoln, there's roads at 8 metres wide, houses both sides. So
Yeah.
Selwyn District Council. So
Yeah, so listen to your client. All right, no more further questions from me. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Got there eventually. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name's Andrew Leckie. I'm a traffic engineer at Stantec.
Good afternoon.
I thought I might just quickly run through my summary and my evidence just to
Yep, thank you.
get us on the roll. So my evidence was focused on responding to the peer review of Mr. Collins. So my view is that it's unnecessary to require the list of roading upgrade projects put forward by Mr. Collins to be carried out prior to development of the site. Most of the projects are remote to the site, including arterial road intersection upgrades through which the development of the site would add very little additional traffic. I should just add there as well that most of those intersection upgrades are planned for the next 2 to 3 years through the long-term plan, so there's certainty there. Regarding the Springs Tossville intersection, which is more local to the site and an important connection to the arterial network, I consider that there's a safe and convenient alternative in Station Masters Way, which is a collector road, to provide access to Springs Road until that intersection is upgraded. And that intersection is also planned for upgrade within the next approximately 4 years. So I consider it unnecessary to delay any potential development of the site until this work is carried out. And in case the panel has any ongoing concerns with this intersection, a potential rule requiring assessment at the subdivision stage has been put forward by Ms. McKeever. So, and I can support that if it's required. It will just on that access to the arrowhead that we've just been talking about. Mr. Collins suggested connectivity through there and into the adjacent land. So in my view, it wouldn't be practicable to provide a local road connection to the northeast beyond the site due to the constrained legal width across the stream. And finally, I've assessed that the development of the site will have a negligible effect on the safety and efficiency of the Tossville Road, Trices Road intersection. And importantly, will not increase the volume of straight through movements on Trices Road. That was in relation to a concern that Mr. Collins had raised. And so I do not consider there's any warrant for requiring minor safety upgrades by the developers of the site at that intersection.
All right. See if we have questions. Raymond.
No question.
And Lindsay.
So just in summary, as a result of this development, there is only possibly one intersection upgrade, which may possibly be required to develop the site to MDRs, which is the Springs Tossville. Is that your conclusion? None of the, it's not going to contribute one dot to any of the capacity problems that there are at any of the other intersections within the Prebbleton network.
It's probably a slightly different thing. I think this is in terms of if we're having a rule and need for assessment at that subdivision stage, looking at the traffic effects. I think that could be focused on the Tossville Road intersection. That would, as part of that, if we were looking at the effects of subdivision, that would need to take into account as well the roundabout at Station Masters Way, because they go hand in hand, the alternative routes. But yeah, beyond there, I've assessed that those intersections on Shands Road, they're a long way away, and there'd be very little use of those from this site. Similarly, the one to the south on Springs Road at Hamptons, I think it was, there was another roundabout there. Very small proportion of the traffic from the site will be heading to the southwest towards Lincoln. So in the context of an arterial road, I didn't think that intersection would be especially relevant either. And then I suppose that would be similar to if, so I haven't mentioned the high trip generator rule in my evidence, but if that was applied at the subdivision stage, which to the letter of that rule it would be, because if it's more than 120 residential lots, high trip generator is triggered, and you'd be doing a full ITA, integrated transport assessment for the subdivision, and at that level you'd be looking at those sort of key connections to the arterial roads nearby, which would be Toswell, Station Masters, and you probably would give some assessment of the Trices intersection as well.
And at the time that occurs, that ITA, it would also be, you'd also know the potential staging, or whether indeed some of those upgrades are actually completed by that stage.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Traffic patterns will be changing as well. Like this ITA was carried out in 2021, so even since then things would have changed. So yeah, that's right.
So on the basis that there's a belt and braces with the ITA, as well as a potential catch-all rule requiring, not catch-all rule, but a statement relating to this property that, if required, and that Springs Toswell Road intersection will be upgraded, you're comfortable that the traffic or transportation effects have been properly dealt with?
Yeah, if there's a if that Toswell Road intersection hadn't been upgraded, and at the time that they did a subdivision application, if that triggered some sort of restricted discretionary status with the assessment of that intersection required as suggested in Ms. McKeever's evidence, I mean, I could accept that. I don't think it's necessary because the high trip generator rules there anyway. And also we know that this project's coming within a few years, so this site might not even be planned for development in that time.
So it might not be required, but if it was to be accelerated, then the council might want to come and talk to you about accelerating it, or talk to your client about accelerating those improvements.
That intersection upgrade,
which is beyond what we're here to look at.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So, Ms. Leakey, I understand your evidence about the improvements identified by Mr. Collins to the west of Shands Road being quite remote from the site, but just coming to the Springs Toswell intersection, which I think is from your evidence or someone's evidence on your team, is scheduled for upgrade in 26-27 to signals. So Mr. and Mrs. Burgess, what's your development time frame? What time frame did you have in mind for development?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, no, we're not developers, we're farmers.
Yeah.
We've farmed the land for 20 years. And even the piece that got into residential was not our choosing, they just did it. And I don't say I didn't like it, but because I was able to sell it and lose some debt and whatnot, pay off some debt on the farm, because we farm at Leaston as well as that block of land. It's not the only block we have. We farm 300 hectares at Leaston. So it was nice to pay some debt. So our idea even now isn't our idea to come here like the private plan changes and whatnot are. It's not our idea to look for a sale of the land. We are here because the council asked for submissions, I suppose you call it, from the owners of what you thought the future of your land was.
Yep.
So we've got a wee bit of a double-edged sword now that we sold some land and we're now trying to farm right up against fences and properties and whatnot. So we made it good for ourselves but hard for ourselves. So in the future, what will happen, I'm not sure. We've had one or two cars driving around the paddocks and getting stuck. We've had, we've got no fence now between our property and the existing houses. We've got a shingle walkway around half of it, which is, it's nice. the people can walk their dogs and go down to the stormwater ponds and it's quite nice, you know, which is great, but we don't have a fence. So we do have a bit of a problem I see in the future looming there. So what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is how long that will be for us where we feel as though we can't farm it successfully anymore.
We won't develop.
We won't definitely not develop.
So let me ask you another question. If we were to find generally in favour of what you're asking for, but we thought this Springs Road, Toswell Road intersection should be upgraded first, and on the current scheduling, if that didn't occur to 2026,
Yes.
and your development of your site couldn't occur before that, would that cause you any great concern?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
All right. No, that's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lecky. No further questions.
Thank you.
Carry on. Yeah, I can listen and write at the same time.
The next witness for the applicant is Mark Thompson.
Afternoon, Mr. Thompson.
Good afternoon. As mentioned, I'm Mark Thompson. I'm a civil engineer. And I'd just like to perhaps touch on a few of the high notes of my evidence. If I can.
Sure, that'd be good.
Thank you. So in respect to the site, I've worked in an engineering capacity for the submitters and liaised with SDC engineering staff and utility service providers in relation to service capacity to cater for the development of the site since about 2016. I've previously either prepared or overseen the preparation of infrastructure reports initially dated 6th of July 2021 in support of submission DPR 0143 and then an updated report 3rd of August 22 in support of the further submission B.03. Given the investigations in that updated August 2022 infrastructure report, I considered it's feasible for the site to be fully serviced in respect of general residential zoning as requested by the original submission and in respect of the medium density residential zoning requested by the further submission. So the August 2022 report noted that collaborative work with Selwyn District Council would be required to assess and resolve any minor localised infrastructure servicing capacity constraints arising from the development of the site. And in this coordinated approach between both developer-led and council-led and key upgrades where necessary is quite standard practice for development and indeed was expected to occur for this site. So it's my understanding that Council's reporting planner has rejected the rezoning submission made and has relied on the reporting engineer, Mr. Blake Manson's statement regarding wastewater and water capacity in Prebbleton to recommend that the panel does reject the submission for residential zoning, including the medium density variation on the basis that the site is not infrastructure ready in respect of the NPS UD. So while not attached to Mr. Blake Manson's evidence, we've sought and been provided with two technical reports that have been relied on by Mr. Blake Manson, being a memorandum by WSP relating to water supply and a report by Stantec relating to wastewater, as well as a covering email by Ms. Carruthers, who's SDC's reporting planner. So, as I say, it appears that Mr. Blake Manson has relied on these reports undertaken in the last year and the premise that the site was not specifically included in the modelling for those two reports to support his statements that capacity is not available in those services. So I do query the extent that Mr. Blake Manson can make such statements regarding capacity when A, the reports are not consistent with one another, as they do not use the same areas of Prebbleton for their hypothetical modelling scenarios, modelling growth, despite both being undertaken in 2022 with shapefile data provided by the council. Not only do the locations differ between the two reports, but the rationale is also unclear as the areas included do not match at a projected infrastructure boundary, included some private plan change areas and not others, and did not include rezoning submission sites in Prebbleton. In particular, it's unclear why the submitted site and identified urban growth overlay area as part of the proposed district plan was not being included in the wastewater model, despite council being aware of the site rezoning potential since 2014 as part of the rural residential strategy, as discussed by some of the other experts already today. Part of the submitted site has been included in the water supply model. The reports do not clearly show where population assumptions for the distribution of predicted growth, have been allocated in the models. Importantly, they do not categorically state that no capacity exists for either water or wastewater services, which is perhaps unsurprising, given they were not prepared for the district plan rezoning process to consider capacity for particular submissions. This information appears to have been inferred by Mr. Blake Manson. The reports are being relied on by council for a purpose that, in my view, does not accord with the WSP and Stantec disclosures within those reports, and appears to be confirmed, as stated in Ms. Carruthers' covering email, who notes, and I quote, they were for high-level direction for infrastructure requirements. Please note that the areas in the reports are not intended to be supported growth areas, but rather hypothetical scenarios. So given our previous work in respect to the site, council's indications throughout that time regarding infrastructure capacity, the modest area being sought to be rezoned, and the statement of the Stantec report that upgrading of the Prebbleton to Rolleston pipeline will not be required until 2062-2063. Even with much more substantial rezoning requests taken into account, it seems to me very likely that had the site been included in the shapefile provided by council to Stantec for wastewater assessment, as it was for the WSP water supply memo identified as growth area 3, that the same or similar conclusions regarding sufficient wastewater capacity for the identified area of the site could or would have been reached by Stantec and therefore by council's report writers. So therefore, I guess based on my review of the evidence by Mr. Blake Manson and the provision of the Stantec and the WSP supporting technical reports, I don't share the infrastructure capacity concerns of the council representatives for the submission site. I consider my recommendation in the August 22 report still stands, and that engineering detail and relevant upgrades of infrastructure can be addressed appropriately in conjunction with council engineering staff at the time of development, when more detailed information regarding demand for service capacity is known as a standard practice. So I'm quite happy to take questions.
Thank you. Raymond.
Yeah, no questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Lindsay.
Just one question. What is going to be required from where we are now to get subdivision consent across the line in terms of wastewater? What sort of things are you going to have to be looking at? Presuming it's the timing?
Yeah, it is the timing. And that's, I think, also quite relevant in regards to, I guess, the overarching capacity constraints that are placed on both the localised infrastructure network directly applicable to this site as well as the wider network, and where capacity demands come from other sites. So quite specifically, as I think I noted in my evidence, that, bear with me, at item 43, there's, I guess, 3 categories of infrastructure that would generally be assessed. There's the local network, which is applicable to the site, and then wider as well, the Prebbleton terminal pump station, and then the Pines wastewater treatment plant. So working, I guess, backwards in that order, it's been reasonably well established. I think that there's a good forward works program put in place by council to increase the capacity of the Pines wastewater treatment plant. The Prebbleton terminal pump station, is the Stantec report does discuss pump upgrades in that report in order to provide additional capacity, and the timing for those is 2062-2063 according to that report. It's possible that if, in my view, if the site were to be added into the Stantec model and then rerun, that potentially those pump upgrades or the timing of those might come forward by a small amount of time. And then in respect of the local network, those upgrades or types of upgrades, again, in my opinion, are normally dealt with at the time of subdivision when specific capacity constraints are known and are quite often developer-led. So that may involve upgrades of a wastewater main in Dossel Road or the pump station, essentially to be able to get wastewater to the Prebbleton terminal pump station. So we've put forward I've put forward a number of options in my August 2022 report, and then summarised again in evidence that I think there's a range of options there. And put simply, I don't believe that the localised network presents a capacity constraint to development.
Okay, so you've had some discussions with Mr. Blake Manson.
No, I've not.
Okay, because on Mr. Blake Manson's recommendation, Ms. Carruthers has basically said for us to not accept the submission for the rezoning because it's not infrastructure ready. And setting aside any transportation issues, which we talked about before, there is a difference between you. And if it's not infrastructure ready, then the recommendation is that it not be approved. So I'm just wondering what your views are on what may be required to, if you like, convince Mr. Blake Manson that it's not a big deal, or it's not a big deal as he thinks it is.
Put quite simply, my suggestion would be that the site be included in an updated suite of modelling that would be prepared, I suppose, as a rerun of the Stantec model, and see what changes that might make to the conclusions drawn by the technical experts at Stantec, and then by Mr. Blake Manson. In my view,
is that an easy thing to do? Is it like in a matter of a few days, or would it require quite a bit of effort to put in the right attributes to rerun the model?
Look, I don't have a direct line into Stantec as to what processes they've undertaken. What I can go off is the summary of their report. I believe it's a relatively simple process. It's a matter of weeks, and days or weeks, in my view, not months.
So you would have heard the chairs questioning Mr. Leakey about the outline development plan and possible restrictions on the Cotswold Springs Road intersection. Could a similar sort of thing apply in terms of wastewater capacity upgrades as well, or
in terms
of either you got to do the work, or you've got to have proof that the work's not required?
I think that's reasonable.
Okay, thank you.
No further questions from me. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today.
Final witness for the applicant is Claire McKeever.
Good afternoon. There's been quite a few topics raised, so I'm probably going to have a quick go through of my executive summary and then probably finish up my conclusion and then potentially just ask the questions of me. That's okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Yep. So look, Gary and Linda have made a comprehensive submission to the proposed Selwyn District Plan Review process to request the rezoning of their land. they've complied with panel minutes. We have updated technical reports in regard to their original request for general residential zone through the PDP itself, and then updated that information last year for a variation 1 submission. Our clients have waited for their opportunity to be heard by the panel. And obviously we're at nearly the end of the process. Yeah. So there's 2 42A reports prepared by the council, both for the Prebbleton rezoning hearings and also for this variation 1 hearing process. The council has rejected this submission based on deferring until now in the original 42A report of January. And then in this particular hearing have rejected the submission entirely on the basis of this wastewater capacity constraint, stating for the first time that no capacity is available and therefore is not infrastructure ready. As we've heard today, questions have been raised on the scope and purpose and use of the reports that have been relied on to reject the submission site on that basis, given that the site wasn't included with modelling, and there's been very little site-specific consideration of the submission really on its merits, with the effort that's been gone to make those 2 quite comprehensive submissions. The matter that I, from a planning point of view, am most concerned about is really the issue about reverse sensitivity and what that means for the clients when the council's recommendation is essentially for the site to be rejected for a form of residential, but also to be retained as general rural zone, and that the positive effects of the proposal haven't been considered either. It is my view that it's the most efficient and reasonable time to resolve these potential for reverse sensitivity effects, with the consideration of this comprehensive submission to be now. And I think that overall, the relevant considerations relating to the proposed rezoning of the site are this impracticality of the general rural zone remaining in context next door to the medium density zone, with those reverse sensitivity effects. The fact that it's a very comprehensive and detailed submission that has included quite a lot of information. This district plan review process is obviously the clear and current opportunity for the landowners to have their land considered. And really that the council had advised our clients very early on that should they wish to rezone their land, it was the best to do it to make a submission, because the council wasn't going to be rezoning anything themselves. So our clients do have a very long history, which I have put through in my evidence as well, since 2014, about a private plan change for large lot residential, or what was called Living 3 at the time, that we had started. So we have a lot of back history and planning work that's been done that the council was aware of to get us to this point. And I think when I conclude and we get to this process, I think really the main issue for the panel, as I see it, is really whether, to your mind, whether you agree this wastewater capacity constraint actually exists that's specific for this site, and whether that actually constitutes the ability to reject it in the terms of this infrastructure ready clause of the NPSUD, particularly given that council was currently undertaking further modelling and long-term planning for infrastructure for a higher density of development as well. So if the panel were to agree with the rezoning, then I guess the matter is to really decide what ODP and rules would be appropriate to be put into the plan, as opposed to the rejecting the relief being the real consideration of, well, is that reasonable in terms of what we're dealing with reverse sensitivity effects. So I suppose depending on where we get to with infrastructure and whether there are additional conditions or things that we could write around that, like we've suggested for transport, there are methods and ways we can deal with both the rezoning. Yeah, so I'm happy to answer questions. I just wanted to keep that really simple.
No, that's good. Thank you very much. Yeah. I'll go first this time. What I'd like you to do, and my colleagues may have some additional things I'd like you to do, is I'd like you to sit down with Ms. Carruthers and prepare for us an ODP narrative that has 2 conditions, what I'm going to call conditions precedent in it, one relating to the Tossell Rose Springs Road intersection upgrade, and the other one relating to wastewater provision. Mm-hmm. So basically that would say within the ODP that development shouldn't occur until those matters are, or until the intersection is upgraded, until the wastewater matter is resolved satisfactorily. And in doing that, I'd like you to be very careful not to trigger a subdivision consent, because we're grappling with under the MRZ, the appropriate activity status for subdivision within the MRZ. And we have various legal opinions on that, but they're veering towards it having to be a controlled activity. So just bear that in mind when you're liaising with Ms. Carruthers on coming up with some wording for us. And in terms of your timing, I'll ask Ms. Carruthers shortly, but what would your timing be for bringing that kind of wording forward?
I think that can be done reasonably quickly. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's really important
End of this
because
week?
you guys don't have much time, right?
End of this week?
End of this week. Oh, let me see. Yes, of course. The answer is definitely yes. Yes, we can do
Rachel,
that.
what's your availability?
I will make that happen, sir.
Thank you. All right, we look forward to receiving that wording for our consideration. That'll help us in our deliberations on what's been asked for.
Yep.
Raymond, anything you'd like to ask Ms. McKee?
Sorry.
Oh, yes. So when we started this proposal back in 2014 and looking to do a private plan change for rural residential, we did start consulting with MKT to figure out what would be involved in considering the site. And in the end, when that private plan change hadn't come forward, we had a little bit of correspondence about waterways and things that were of particular interest. So we have made very sure in the original application to spend quite a bit of time to go through the EV management plan and to be carefully considering what the main priorities of that all the way are in terms of this development. So yes, we considered it in our original submission.
Thank you. No more questions.
Lindsay?
No, I think we've traversed the issues which were in front of my mind, and certainly with the chair's comments to you. So thank you.
Thank you. And in terms of that liaison and further work you're going to do with Ms. Carruthers, I understand you'll take the ODP narrative that's on page 46 of your evidence as a starting point. It'd also be helpful for us to, if you could provide, I don't know who's easiest to draw this, the council or yourselves, you can sort that out. 2 ODP maps, one showing the roading connection over the little land bridge to the Arrowhead, and one that doesn't show it. And then we'll have both of those in front of us as well.
I did wonder if you would ask me about that. It all comes down to the 5-lot subdivision that was done in between times for our clients to be able to sell the piece of land to the neighbour to develop.
Yeah.
And if I might mention that the piece between the edge of Provels and where the stormwater reserve is actually then vested as utility reserve. So the reason for the strip in the middle at the time was what was needed for a rural residential development on the other side, which would have been 3 lots at that time. And once we create the reserve underneath as part of a subdivision, you can't get that land back from reserve. So the strip in the middle had to not be reserved because it had to continue to be owned to be able to put that bridge over later. So there's actually a Legal Reserves Act reason why that strip between was left as it was, with the width appropriate at the time. So
Okay, and if there's concern about whether or not you can have a legal road over that, what I'm calling the little land bridge, then we've had other evidence before us that, you know, there's other developments have come before us with width restrictions on access to the site through existing cul-de-sacs, and we've had evidence a 10-metre wide cul-de-sac can be formed quite easily into a one-way street, and given the level of traffic, etc., that could be an option here as well. I had another question for you in terms of the ODP and the open space reserve notations. So is the underlying, what's the underlying zoning on that? Is that MRZ underneath it, or what is it?
in terms of what we would propose going forward. Oh, yes, I see. Yes, so we would just ask for the site to be MRZ, but I suppose you would have the option with the ODP if you were minded to make part of it medium density and part of it open space zone for reserve if you wanted. I suppose it's a little bit different because it's utility reserve in the first instance. So I don't know how council deals with its open space reserve, which is more recreation focused.
Yeah.
So typically you end up getting your one zoning and then you put the reserve over the top.
So can you factor that into your discussions with Ms. Carruthers?
Yeah.
Because that was a question I had in mind. I was just wondering what the underlying zoning was beneath those green reserves in your ODP map, whether it was some kind of urban zoning, but just with the reserve over the top, or if it was a quite different zoning.
It's usually what happens.
Yeah, if you can discuss that and come forward as what is the agreed best position, that would be helpful.
Okay,
All right,
not a problem.
anything else to follow up on? Lizzie?
No, just one thing.
Yep.
Just in terms of your last comment, there is no open space zone in Selwyn. A lot of councils do have open space zones of various things to do with
Right.
sports grounds and so forth, but so that probably needs to be put in the context of this
Okay.
as well.
Great. Good one. All right, unless there's anything you wish to add at this point?
I don't believe there is. As I understand it, you're just looking for the, you've given instructions to Ms. McKeever for the outline development plan.
Yeah.
Hopefully filed by the end of this week, having consulted with Ms. Carruthers,
It's not a consultation, it's a working together.
working together to
Yeah.
produce these. Good. Can I just make the point, though, that in terms of the council's stance about land having to be infrastructure ready, it's my legal submission that NPSUD has turned that on its head, that it's for the council to provide infrastructure ready land to fulfill its capacity for 30 years, rather than for developers to have to prove that their land is infrastructure ready.
Okay, well, in terms of that legal submission, what's the point of that? Where are
That
you
it-
hoping
that
that's
it's-
going to take us?
And in the case of this land, it sounds like it's not a problem to show that it is infrastructure ready, but for the council to say, no, we haven't put the infrastructure in place to provide 30 years growth capacity is not the way that things work now under NPSUD. It is for the council to provide not just the zoning, but the infrastructure to provide for 30 years growth, rather than to, in the words of Judge Jackson, dole things out in a Soviet style. You can have X hectares for the production of pig iron. So it's not the question of individual landowners having to come to the council and be doled out the amount that the council says it will spend on infrastructure. The council has to provide the infrastructure and can fund that through development contributions. That it's not a case of the council closing doors, it's a case of council opening doors, in the words of the Bunnings case.
I'm still struggling to see what you're hoping to achieve by making that submission. If we have a request before us to rezone this as MRZ according to the ODP map and narrative in front of us, we've discussed some issues that we'd like to be further addressed. So where is that
Absolutely.
legal submission taking us?
Yeah, just it, and I say it's a legal submission rather than a factual issue of whether the land is infrastructure ready or not. But, and as a factual matter, it is infrastructure ready. But as a legal submission, the question is not, is it infrastructure ready, or do the positive effects of rezoning it outweigh the negative effects?
Do you understand the point you're trying to make?
Oh, I think so, but I think there also needs to be a bit of, I think there possibly needs to be a little bit of real world reality in here that
I absolutely agree.
council is not there to provide the infrastructure. They are there to provide the capacity for the infrastructure to be
Yes.
provided.
Yeah.
And there are mechanisms for that. That's my simple view on it. And others might take a contrary view, but that's in terms of providing that 30-year capacity. There are measures that the council need to put in place to make sure
Yes,
they
yeah.
can provide that for it.
Yeah, if we said, for instance, that the upgrade that's spoken about in the Stantec report, which the Stantec report indicates that upgrade is not required, even with, taking account of quite a bit of growth, that it's not required until 2062. But if it said, well, it's going to be required in 2026, and we're not planning to pay for that or do that until 2036. So we're not going to zone any more land because we just aren't planning to provide the infrastructure for it. That would not be the correct approach under NPSUD. So as I say, as a matter of fact, because that, the prediction from Stantec is that upgrade is not required until 2062, it doesn't arise on the facts in this case, but yeah, that it's not for the council to hold back development and not fulfill the NPSUD. It's for the council to give effect to the NPSUD. Yeah, having regard to the real world. I agree.
All right, thank you very much. So if that's all, that brings us to the end of today's hearing, and we reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. when we're hearing from Birches Village Limited. Heather, have you managed to confirm if Mr. Fletcher wishes to come to speak to the Drinian submission or not? He's not going to come? Okay, that's good. All right, thank you very much, everyone.
Did you